This is the download from Sounds Profitable, the most important news from this week and why it matters to people in the business of podcasting. I'm Manuela Bedoya.
And I'm Shreya Sharma. This week, the app tracking transparency recession, streamers struggle with frequency capping, Bumper calculates listen time, and IPG Equity Upfront spotlights lack of diverse ad spend.
The download is brought to you by Magellan AI. Track the trends in spend, ad load, podcasts on YouTube, and more with Magellan AI's advertising benchmark report for Q4. Available now. Find the link in the description or at magellan.ai.
Let's get started.
While not hot off the presses, an early January article from Eric Benjamin Seufer discussing the effects of Apple's app tracking transparency has come across the download's desk. As with most things in advertising, there's nuance in the numbers. Quick refresher for those who haven't seen the letters ATT dozens of times. App tracking transparency was a privacy policy introduced to iOS in 2021 that turns most forms of mobile data tracking into an opt-in service. As a result, a significant portion of iOS users have digitally disappeared for advertisers. An upset to the status quo for sure, but the overall numbers provided by Seufer show the digital advertising market is not in a cyclical downturn. That said, social media platforms and other industries most likely to be affected by ATT have experienced a significant downturn due to a combination of both ATT-influenced changes and changing consumer preferences, which is to say, not macroeconomics factors. A market-wide downturn, as well as more stress on those companies most affected by ATT, would primarily come from an actual 2023 recession. Overall, digital advertising has been working as intended. Consumers are consuming. Seufer points to a Bureau of Labor Statistics graph tracking U.S. employment in December of 2022. According to these, unemployment is the lowest it has been since August 1969. From Seufer's piece, quote, "But one might assume that the economy has utterly imploded from reading the Q3 earnings call transcripts of various social media platforms. Alphabet, Meta, and Snap in particular cited macroeconomic weaknesses, headwinds, uncertainty, challenges, etc. in their Q3 earnings calls." End quote. In the week since Seufer's article, the overall numbers are trending to agree. The download has recently mentioned podcast ad spend has remained up while others decline. But the same holds true for other areas. Last week, a piece of Ethan Kramer Flood for Insider Intelligence reports mobile app install ad spending increased 24.8% in 2022, on track to a market growth of 12% this year. Meanwhile, still on Insider Intelligence, Daniel Konstantinovich reports that while market concerns aren't gone, ad cost inflation has slowed. 84% of ad executives told Insider Intelligence they're not lowering budgets for 2023. From the article, quote, "But now the industry is adjusting to a new normal. With inflation steadily falling and the cost per ad decreasing, some of the advertising spending that has staunched in the second half of last year may return." End quote. The future may be uncertain, but for the wider advertising economy, podcasting included, things tend to be stable or trending upward. And it bears repeating, podcasting has never benefited from mobile device IDs. From this industry's perspective, at least, ATT has little to no impact. It feels fitting to end with this quote from Seufer's article. Quote, "While one might materialize the belief that an advertising recession is currently incomprehensibly depressing advertising spend is difficult to support with analytical rigor." End quote.
If you used a video streaming service with advertisements, you're likely intimately aware of the industry's issue with frequency caps. Last week's Future of TV briefing from Digiday's Tim Peterson zooms in on this particular issue with the section capping out. Streaming advertisers are in a bind. Some viewers are getting underexposed to ads while others are overexposed. Problems that will only exacerbate as digital video streaming continues on its overtake of traditional television. According to a recent eMarketer graph, US adults only average 5 minutes less digital video time than television last year, and are projected to overtake TV's declining numbers for the first time this year. Of course, addressing the frequency issues isn't as easy as it sounds. A myriad of reasons exist, from lack of ability to track exposures across multiple streaming platforms to multiple DSPs buying from the same pool. Even when the solution exists, sometimes it comes at a price. Peterson reports some streamers are charging more in exchange for placing stricter frequency caps. An anonymous ad agency executive told Digiday, and I quote, "Some will endeavor to charge more for more restrictive frequency caps, which could be prohibitive or incentivize lower spend from partners. But more and more they're willing to waive these fees. And hopefully that will be the case going forward, as I think these lower frequency caps are the expectation, not the exception anymore." End quote. This particular piece made the cut this week for two reasons. Number one, it's a good overview of the situation as it currently stands for streamers, of course. Number two, it serves as a reminder that issues we experience in the business of podcasting are not always unique to us, nor is the onus on our industry to magically fix a problem ourselves. Something to keep in mind before the next headline about podcasting's frequency capping problem rolls around.
Back in January, Bumper's Jonas Woost posted a proposal for the podcasting industry to move past the download and evolve similarly to how YouTube has evolved past the view. While not abandoned by any means, video view counts have taken a backseat to watch time metrics in recent years. Bumper's future aims for podcasters to have their own metric with listen time. This week, Dan Meissner has followed up Jonas' post by calculating listen time on an episode of his podcast, Grown-Ups Read Things They Wrote as Kids. From the article, quote, "Inconveniently, many podcast apps simply do not report listen time or equivalent metrics. At Bumper, we try not to let perfect be the enemy of good. So to calculate listen time for podcast episodes, we do the best we can with what we have, then use reasonable estimates for the rest." End quote. While not a Herculean effort, Meissner's step-by-step guide on how to pull your own numbers from Apple and Spotify requires some arithmetic and a teeny bit of opening your browser's code to find a specific JSON file. For anyone finding themselves interested for business reasons or perhaps for a geeky weekend math project, the article also provides a Google Sheets template to start from. In addition to the guide for Apple and Spotify, Meissner tosses in a few extra credit opportunities into the assignment with suggestions for also implementing YouTube watch time, Google Podcasts minutes played, and hours listened data from applicable embedded web players. As Meissner says in its closing bullet points, the download isn't going anywhere. Bumper's goal is to aim for a future where downloads are not the only metric considered. Now, to see if various platforms and apps share a similar outlook and make steps to provide listen time, we'll keep our ears opened.
This month, the IPG Media Brands Equity Upfront event in New York brought together around 30 publishers to focus on media with owners of diverse backgrounds. Ryan Barwick of Marketing Brew was in attendance to cover the event. Here's an excerpt from his article, and I quote, "Nearly 2 years after many in the advertising industry revealed plans to invest more money in Black-owned media, those publishers said they are still educating media buyers and advertisers about what they have to offer." End quote. According to Magna US President Danny Benowitz, IPG Media Brands increased its ad spend in Black-owned media 61% between 2021 and 2022, as well as a 7% increase in Hispanic-owned media and 32% in Asian-owned media. Still, money isn't flowing in as fast as old promises implied. According to Magna's estimates from Nielsen data, only 2% of total ad spend goes to Black-owned media, despite 14% of the US population being Black. This week, Marketing Brew's Katie Hicks writes on similar pay inequity in influencer marketing. Here's an excerpt from that, and I quote, "In December 2021, influencer education platform The Influencer League and PR agency MSL US released a study that found that Black creators on average made 35% less than white creators. While the issue has gotten more attention in the last year, Brittany Bright, founder of the Influencer League, told us that efforts to address it are still in their early stages." End quote. Cavell Khan, CCO of Group Black, a collective of publishers and creators focused on bringing more ad dollars to Black-owned media, ends Barwick's piece explaining events like IPG's equity upfront put a stop to excuses for industries not prioritizing minority-owned media companies. Here's a quote from Khan. "Everyone who's going to present to you is creating value. You're going to have an overwhelming amount of evidence when you sit here for 3 days. You have to act." End quote. Finally, it's time for our semi-regular roundup of articles we're calling Quick Hits. These are articles that didn't quite make the cut for today's episode but are still worth including in your weekend reading. This week, if you work for a podcast network, we've got a webinar sign-up link you'll want to check out. Clear your calendar for Wednesday, March 1st, when Brian Barletta takes to the virtual stage with Frequency CEO Pete Jimison to talk about Frequency's next generation of podcast workflow tools. Catch a live demo and hear directly from Pete about automating vetting processes that can help you gain speed, efficiencies, and scale your network. Visit the link in our show notes to register. Please note, registration requests will only be accepted for those that work at podcast networks. Aaron's, iHeart, and Magellan AI have released the Australian top 15 podcast advertisers for Q4 2022. From Amazon to Aldi, the list covers a wide spectrum of businesses. The Digiday Media Awards deadline for submissions is fast approaching, with the regular deadline being March 9th and the last chance deadline on April 20th. This year will be the first edition of the awards to include Top Podcast. IAB Tech Lab's first data cleanroom standard is open for public comment by Alison Schiff. A solid explanation of the standard and what impacts it could have.
And that was The Download, brought to you by Sounds Profitable. Today's episode was built using Spooler and hosted on Art19. Find out more at spooler.fm and art19.com. I know we went through today's stories fast, so be sure to check out the links to every article mentioned, right in your podcast listening app or on soundsprofitable.com. And thank you for sticking with us as we bring you the top stories you might have missed from the past week. I'm Manuela Bedoya.
And I'm Shreya Sharma. Our producers are Ron Barletta, Gavin Gaddis, and Tom Webster. Our editors are Breeze Carmen and Ron Tentic. Special thanks to Art19 for hosting The Download, and as always, thank you to you for joining us. Robot?
Download complete.